Hello, I'm Mark Sumner, host of the Channel Chat podcast show, and today I have the pleasure of Colin Brown, ex-MD and now advisor for Softcat, and also Edwyn Van Rooyen, the CEO of Teacup in the virtual house. How are we doing, guys?
All very good this morning. Thanks, Mark.
Good. How are you doing, Edwyn?
Very, very well. Thanks, and thanks for having us.
Oh, look, thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on. So, guys, look, we'll get straight into it. This is a subject I'm very passionate about. Throughout the pandemic, I think it's been so accelerated, this problem. And I think, even though the channel probably knew about this problem before over the years, it hasn't been exacerbated as in the last 6 months. So I think it's so relevant. So, and also mental health has been a topic that's sort of come up in the channel before. There's been a lot of slogans out there. It's okay not to be okay, et cetera, et cetera. But those slogans don't really mean anything unless we can identify the problem. So if I come to you first, Colin, what strategies have you had in place to sort of tackle and mitigate the risk of what you're seeing at Softcat? And if there's been sort of any mental health challenges through the pandemic yourself, what you've seen?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Good question to start with, and thanks once again for bringing this topic to the front of house, because it's such an important topic. So if you think about the channel, and obviously, we're on the channel chat here. The channel is so dependent on its people. We don't have products to focus on. So channel, whether it's Softcat, Computer Center, CDW, whoever, it's all about having great people who bring great solutions to the customers. And again, anybody who's had the misfortune to listen to me for 5 minutes will say that you will only have great customer satisfaction and great customer service if you have the highest engagement from your employees. So I'm just reiterating the point that we are so dependent on our employees being fully engaged and being happy. And I think first of all that means that we have a responsibility to our employees. So yes, our output depends on our employees being happy, but we have a responsibility for our employees as well, to make sure that they're feeling good, they're feeling okay, and that's actually all the time. But never has it been so necessary as throughout the sort of last 9 months through the pandemic. And one of the challenges, certainly, that Softcat has faced is we have a relatively young workforce. We also have relatively young and relatively experienced, let's say, managers. And those managers, they're not equipped. They haven't been trained to really talk to their people in a highly empathetic way about how they're feeling, probe them about their well-being, whether that's mental health, whether that's physical health, whether that's just coping with being at home with a young family and all those sorts of things. You could list 20 reasons. If the three of us just sort of brainstormed and we could get to 20, 30, 40 component parts as to why people might not be feeling good at the minute. And we've done, as most organizations have done, we've trained mental health first aiders, things like that, over the last couple of years. We've signed up to the mental health work charter, things like that. So it's something that we take very seriously, but kind of nothing really equips you for what we've had to do over the last 9 months. And we've just started to go into a little bit more practical things. And a very good friend of mine actually has been a Samaritan for many, many years. And you said at the start there about, that we have these slogans, don't we, about it's okay to be not okay and things like that. Reality is, and especially in a male-dominated business like we're in, men don't really like talking about this stuff. They don't really like holding their hand up and say they're not okay. So they can hear that slogan every day. They're still not going to go, "Oh mate, I'm not okay." You really need to bring it out of people. And one of the real easy tips, as I say, that this friend in the Samaritans said to me is, you have to ask the question, are you feeling okay? How are you doing? You ask it in that way and you'll get the kind of everything's fine, blah, blah, blah. You have to ask it again, maybe the second time and maybe the third time. Are you really okay? And ask more specific questions. How are things at home? How are you and your family getting? So really just ask probing questions that will actually get you to the answer, rather than just general questions, which can have very general answers. So, encouraging people to just ask specific questions, to pick up on what they know about that person and be specific about that. I think that's one way where you can, it's not guaranteed to, but you've got a much better chance of getting under the skin of what people are feeling if you ask those sorts of questions.
Yeah, because on that, what you've just said there, Colin, I think that's so prevalent. I'm asking people, or I would have done asking people, hi, Colin, are you all right? And I'm just expecting you just to say yes. I'm not going to ask you again. Almost, I know this sounds horrible, I'm almost not really interested in the answer. It's almost just like a pleasantry. You okay, Colin? Yeah, good. Anyway, talking about what I want to talk about. So to me, to sort of have the foresight to think, no, but Colin, are you really okay? Because if someone said that to me, I'll be thinking, yeah, I'm great. But if they ask me again, I'm thinking, no, I'm not so great, actually. It's been a really, really tough 6 months. So how can we, because there's one thing knowing what you've just said, but there's also having the mindfulness to sort of think, I'm going to really try and probe on that. So how do we encourage those managers and those leaders to actually think, because it does sound almost so caring to sort of do that, but men that aren't used to doing that, especially in these high octane roles that we're in IT, we're not used to doing that. We're used to sort of, pumping up salespeople and making sure that, and before, and I'm embarrassed to say it with my own sales guys, I wouldn't almost be interested in hearing the not okay. I'm almost interested thinking, yeah, you're okay, moving on. But now through this awareness, I'm having to start thinking about it more because it's become more important. So how do you think we can encourage people to sort of realize that there's signs out there and it's not embarrassing to actually, even if someone is okay, to probe if you think they're not okay?
I think it's about, like a lot of things in life, it's about putting yourself in other people's shoes. So getting a manager to say, how do you think your guy or girl would be feeling if they know that you care about them, if you know that you're trying to get a handle on how they're feeling, and as a result of getting a handle on their feeling, what you can do then to help them to feel better about things, or to be better equipped with things, or to cut a bit of slack in certain ways, or to move that regular Monday morning meeting that you've got to a Wednesday afternoon, which might be more convenient for them, because these days routines are so different things again. So I think it's about just encouraging people to say, how would that make you feel? And you think, well, that would make me feel good. I'd love to think that my manager was literally caring about me and not just caring about my sales figures this month or this week or whatever it is. So if we encourage people to think that it'll actually improve and enhance their standing, first of all, in the eyes of their team, but moreover, they're just doing the right thing. And I think a lot of this is about doing the right thing. It's not melodramatic to talk about, saving people's lives and saving people's careers. They might just go into a tailspin and just completely lose focus and things like that. And if they lose focus on the career, then that impacts their livelihood and their earnings and their income and things. So it is not melodramatic to say, this is critical for people. So just encourage people to think what a difference you can make for somebody. And if you make a difference for somebody, they'll remember it for life. So who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I come to you on this, Ed, subject, Ed, most people are going to feel embarrassed about telling someone. They might feel embarrassed. They might feel ashamed for whatever reason, especially salespeople. There's high octane. They're perceived as sort of like being strong and go-getters and all that sort of stuff. And they might feel embarrassed. So how do you think we can make it easier for people to reach out to management or friends or co-workers to say that they have got a problem if they are really suffering?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Mark. I think for me, empathy is great, creating a culture of empathy where it's, psychologists talk about this psychological safety net, creating that sort of environment. But from a TCA perspective, I think where we look at it is how can we use current trends to work with people and bring technology. If we look at we all talk about younger generation and Generation Z, whatever, people spend a lot of time on social platforms. They have better relationships with their phones almost than their than their colleagues or with their friends, virtual friends, etc. So I think we're coming from a perspective of, yes, we can try and change people's perceptions and we can create environments where we create that psychological safety net. But we also feel there's a play that technology can play here, is how can we get people to reflect? Because I think one of the big problems with mental health is it's hard to ask people how they're doing if you're not quite sure how you're doing yourself. And it's very much this safety net thing, put on your own mask. A lot of people are hurting themselves, and a lot of these young and old managers will be, suffering in silence themselves. So one of the things where we try and come from is try and get people to put on that safety net first. Start to reflect on your own well-being, on your own mental health, and create with technology, this whole social environment, social communities, digital communities, creates communities where the data can almost facilitate that conversation in a way that doesn't give away anonymity. Because I think that is a way that if you're reflecting and your colleagues are reflecting in silence with themselves in their own private space, in their own time, but we can somehow bring the data to the fore and let the data almost play a role in a soft way to say, actually, we aren't all okay. Then we're not relying on people asking the question. We are relying in a way, that people are much more averse to technology and insights and so on, and saying, well, actually, guys, look at our trends. We aren't okay. So let's have a chat. And that creates a safe environment where, we are going beyond this facade of perfect social media posts and look how I'm smashing today, and look how I'm, look at me training, look at my amazing meal, look at what a wonderful time I'm having, which is all filtered, technically and also from an emotional perspective.
Yeah, because you mentioned before we started the show, like 1 in 4 people suffer from issues, and I was almost thinking when you said that, I was thinking, yeah, I don't want to be the 1 in 4. I don't want to be in that 25% gang. No one wants to be in that in that segment. So once you've identified it, that's one thing, and I think it's absolutely great, the product. I really, really do, and it's something. Even now, I'm thinking, we've got to have it in our own company. I think the product's great. Once we've identified it, how can we then? Maybe we go to Colin first. But how can we then deal with the problem? Because if someone had come to someone in our firm 3 months ago, I've got a problem. Seriously, we'd be just looking around each other thinking, what do we do? We wouldn't have a clue how to handle it. So we've identified the problem, and maybe the trend is going down and they're struggling. They've come to Colin or a manager of Colin. How do we then tackle it? How will you tackle it then, Colin, when the problem's been actually identified? They've got a serious issue.
Yeah. Well, I think there's multiple levels of complexity around this, and as I kind of referred to a little bit earlier on, sometimes I think just hearing what the problem is might lead you to a very quick fix, which could be just changing a routine. It could be changing right. We don't now need you to do this twice a week anymore. You can forget about that if that is a burden on you. If you literally need to have Wednesday afternoons off because your wife has to go and look after their parents or her parents that day, and you need to do childcare, that's fine as well. So it's literally just not knowing the things, and I think people are shy to ask for this, to say, from 3 o'clock on Wednesday, I'm not going to be around for this reason, because they think, goes back to your point about we're all, this alpha male, we're, hunters and gatherers, and I have to do that just to do childcare. That makes me sound like really namby-pamby, doesn't it? I don't want people to feel like that, but it's probably true that some people do feel like that, and probably one of the reasons they feel like that is because they're scared of what their manager's reaction will be. Yeah. So I think to your question about what can we do about it, as I say, at a very basic level, I think that just that openness and just that sharing what the problem is or the challenge is might be enough to unlock some of that tension and create a step forward there. Obviously, if people have much more serious issues than that, then I think as an employer, we have a duty of care to open up professional resources to those people as well. And Softcat would 100% do that. We have great employee care programs, and we would make sure that we had a professional to work with those people as well once they'd opened up to that sort of thing. So, as I say, I think there's different levels to that. But I'll go back to, from an organizational point of view, your people are your best assets, and you have to look after those assets. Not just for that selfish organization, the better they're performing, the better our business is. Clearly, that's in the background. But we have a duty of care, and we want to take it very seriously. And I would literally hate to think that if I'd been able to do one more thing, I could have helped that person and I didn't do it. That would just make me feel absolutely terrible. And I know that's the same for everybody at Softcat as well. So I think, as I say, there's some simple things that can be done. What it all comes back to is unlocking what the issue or what the blocker is in the first place, and then you have a path to be able to create some answers.
Yeah, and Ed, and this is a question for you, Ed. I think what Softcat are doing is great, etc. Softcat are a big name in our industry. Maybe they might have more financial power to do these things, and etc. What if you're a very small organisation? you haven't got the financial power to do these things, and you haven't got the foresight that Softcat have thinking to put these things in place. So this is the first time you're hearing of these problems. You're listening to the show and you're thinking, yeah, we've got 10 employees, but Joey, is going to have a month off now, and it's 10% of our workforce. How do you think they can handle that?
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't matter if you're 10 employees or 10,000. I think knowing what two things. I think knowing there's, as Colin says, there's different complexities of problems. If somebody's gone off, then they may need professional help. So there's putting those safeguards in place. But I think from our perspective, data and insight is key. A one size fits all doesn't work, and one person's small problem is another person's big problem. So I think for us, what we try and look at is, try and get individuals and organizations to understand, to take a little bit of personal responsibility, as I said, to reflect on themselves, be willing to share, some aggregated views and trends. And then, we had a really interesting case study with a client who's actually, they employ a couple of thousand people. I won't name any names, but they're in the sort of public sector, so they don't have huge coffers at the moment to just go and pay and buy benefits. And when we looked at different demographics and different teams, it was clear that not everybody suffers the same at the moment. So firstly, just knowing broadly where there's an issue was really helpful. But they didn't actually have money to go and buy and help bring in external resources. But what they got to do is just open up the conversation, because they could be proactive. They could identify a small group of individuals who were suffering, and then they just focused on what those individuals could control. And in a world where we are at the moment, where if you look at anxiety rate rising, and what causes anxiety is the lack of unknown. So what these guys did, they said, what can we control in a world where there's all these uncontrollables, pandemic, etc., etc. What can we control? And actually what they could control was how active they were. So they were all remote working, but they got up and they did a virtual faux mute, for example. Yeah. They could control what they eat. So they had it twice a week. They had a Ready, Steady, Cook show where they just in half an hour try to share some ideas and diets. They could control, for example, so how much hydration, how much water they drank, how they brought in some form of routine. And I think that's the key. There's not always a need for external investment and huge payment. It's little things can have a huge impact, because what happened when they start to control those really simple things, they also engendered a culture of teamwork, and actually we're in this together, and that drastically changed. Brought them out of a little bit of a slump to the point where they are now one of the best teams in terms of well-being and mental health.
I think that point is so important, Ed, that you just mentioned, and I was going to step in with something. It's true, and I'm glad you called me up on that. It's, so to speak, Mark, that not everybody's got the resources to provide professional help and things like that. But one really good thing, exactly as Ed just said, is even in a small company, once you've identified what the issue is, the one great thing will happen is everybody around will come in to help. So even if you are that 10-person company that you just said, and you got your one man down, so to speak, you'll be amazed what those 9 people will then do to help their colleague and support the colleague and step in for the colleague and things like that as well. So again, it all comes back for me is to identifying the issues, and that's one of the many things that I think is fantastic about Teacup, about just that gaining the insights in the first place. That's what Teacup is so powerful for.
Yeah, and we've almost touched on this question already, but I do want to get Colin's view on it. There is a variety of different mental health issues, ranging from anxiety, depression, to alcoholism, to addiction, whatever it can be. And there's a common trigger that I'm seeing in the market. I'm hearing it all over the channel. Is isolation. People are at home, and they could be having families and still being isolated, but people are at home and being isolated, and not being able to have those coffee moments, or that water cooler moments, or lunch times, or walks down the road, or whatever it is. And the Zoom meetings aren't doing it. I'm hearing this. Oh yeah, Mark, don't worry. We're having, we've got mental health sorted, because we all have a Zoom meeting once a month, or once a week. And we ask on the Zoom meeting, anyone problems, just shout out if you've got a problem. And they're expecting people to just shout out in front of 30 people they've got a problem. So we have touched on it, and you've given some good theories as well. But with the continuing isolation of people thinking, I might not go back to an office, and especially, Colin, your culture is brought up by bringing people together and a very, very strong culture with people in person. How are you dealing with that culture piece and even identifying if even people have got a problem? And yes, Ed, I think the data is imperative, and I'm hoping that every channel firm is going to adapt Teacup. But if they haven't got that data currently, how can they even identify, and how can we stop that isolation? Because even if they have got a problem, if Colin's in Marlow and someone's in Scotland, it's going to be still quite difficult to even get that problem identified.
Yeah. No, it's top of the priority, really, isn't it? And it's, let's be honest here. None of us have got answers for how you deal with that isolation, because we are in, to use that massively overused phrase, we're in uncharted waters here. We've never had to deal with this before, but it's massive, and I couldn't agree more with you than saying, you got 6 or 7 people on a Zoom call or a Teams call or a WebEx call, and everyone feeling okay. That's just going through the motions. That creates nothing. One of the things which we talked about, actually, probably 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, was we suddenly had that, hold on a minute, we're now doing Teams calls, which is what we use mostly in Softcat, for everything. Actually, bizarrely, and almost sort of seems counter intuitive, sometimes actually just phoning somebody on a phone is actually more intimate than looking at them in a formal businessy. And we kind of got them and said, right, I'm just going to give somebody a call and see if they're okay. And that makes such a difference. If it's unprompted, if it's unscheduled, and you just phone somebody up and say, I'm just calling you up to see, chew the fat for 10 minutes, see how it's going, And that's when you catch people off their guard, and they'll open up to you a little bit more. I mean, does that tackle the isolation thing? No, not really, because you're still not seeing people, you're still not having those water cooler chats, and you're still not recreating that culture that makes successful companies absolutely boom. But at least that was something. I think the return of the phone call is a tiny thing, but I think it's actually quite an important thing. But also, I think in terms of tackling the isolation, Ed touched on it a little bit as well, and this is something that Softcat's done. As I said, right, in our teams, right, from 8:30 to 9 a.m., we're all going to have our commute or our phone mute. I can't really get myself to say that phone mute thing. It's like, I think it's going to catch on. But from 8:30 to 9, we'll have our phone mute, and we're literally everyone can go out for a walk, or they can sit on the bike and if they've got one of those or whatever. But we'll all go, and we'll just talk about stuff. Whatever happened yesterday, we'll talk about that. What, Liverpool actually lost the game at home? Well, what do you think of that? Or whatever it may be. So again, is that truly tackling isolation? No. Does it make you feel a little bit more connected to somebody? Yes. And I think at the minute, like everything, it's all about the more you can do, the better. We can't recreate the perfection of human contact and the buzz that people get from that. And Ed will know it much more than I do, but how psychologically that just improves every aspect of your well-being. It's just that element of togetherness and fun that you have with people. So no, you can't recreate that, but you just got to identify those ways where you can at least do something that's more than just leaving people to stew in their own living room, bedroom, or whatever it is, that they're stuck in 5 days a week at the minute, or even 7 days a week at the minute.
Yeah, and Ed, I wanted to come to you on this point, because I think this is really, really important. We're in an industry where, and Colin's touched on it already, we're in an industry where it's perceived weak or embarrassing or very challenging to sort of say, I've got a problem. That is, there's no doubt about that. And I'm sure in every industry, but I feel specifically in the IT industry, because it's very much high octane going out, and this could be pressure with targets, it could be excessive drinking, it could be whatever. Now, while someone's in that mindset, the last thing they're going to want to do, or I perceive that they want to do, is to get on an app and give someone the data to identify the problem. How can we make sure and educate people to think while they're in that mindset to do that? Because I'm seeing it for myself. I know that I should be exercising per day. I know I should be eating healthy. I know I should be drinking less. I know all these things. Am I doing it? No. Am I doing it? And while you're in that mindset, the last thing I'm going to think is, oh, actually, I need to go on Teacup and put my data in to do that. So how can we re-educate it and make people feel actually, do you know what? This lifestyle, this industry is okay if I don't want to use the slogan now, it's okay not to be okay, but it's okay to actually think, do you know what? I don't want to have to sort of go into that industry and have to do these things and have to be perfect all the time. I'm actually need to encourage this data to actually make sure I'm keeping check on myself, because this is about self-awareness. You know, it's not about the perception if Colin thinks out of control, depressed or anxiety, whatever it is. You know, this is for myself. This is to regulate myself. So how can people have the foresight and the awareness to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark, and it's probably one of our biggest challenges. You know, how do you get the alpha male to log into a pastel-colored app, give some data, and answer some questions which could be quite personal? And I think the we tackle that question in a number of different ways. The first is actually playing on, newer generations love tech, they love data, they love analysis. And within the technology, you actually get a lot of that. You get a lot of actually playing, looking at your graphs, looking at your data. But it is a self-mirror. It could have been called my mirror, because what you're doing, it's a safe space and safe environment. And that's probably the first challenge that any industry, we explain to users that this is your space. Only you can see you. It's your little environment to reflect on the areas that impact your well-being the hardest. For the app then to build a baseline on you are your own baseline or your own benchmark, and then to start measuring and analyzing how a small change in maybe my drinking habits what's the impact on that on my sleep. And that's really where, if we can overcome that initial hurdle of just getting people to, and we think it takes about 21 days to build a baseline, and it's all very techy, showing your baseline being built, etc. But if we can get people just over that first 3 weeks where they can start understanding, become more self-aware, then it becomes really interesting for, techies in particular, who's like, well, actually, I didn't realize that on this day, if I go out for drinks, actually how much it really subjectively impact my sleep. And 2 days later, the app's telling me my mood's dropping because, so I'm going to try something different and see what the impact is. And that's really where, from an individual perspective, it's really interesting. But organizations in that first 3 weeks play a big role here. And there's a part for organizations to make the individuals aware that their motives are pure. They're not going to use the data against them, even though they can't identify individuals. But there's also incentives and mechanisms built in the technology we call T-Bucks, where you can get virtual currency, where organizations can incentivize at least the early stages whilst people are building that trust, maybe out of their comfort zone, reflecting on things, not quite aware what the output is going to be. So I think, we try and tackle it 2 ways. We've tried to build it quite fun, interactive, gamify it as much as we can, but organizations also play a role.
Yeah.
I think that one point about if you commit to it for a while and you start to understand your trends. If I think about Softcat staff, Mark, exactly as Ed said, they are interested in the same way as they're interested in, if I go to the gym and do this exercise for 2 weeks, what difference that's going to have on me, and my PT tells me, right, you've really improved this by X amount, etc. I think that's an element that if you explain this to them, it will tell them stuff about themselves. It will show them that it's actually Wednesday that you have your dip, or it's Thursday you have your dip. Why do you associate that? Well, it's about that understanding, and then you're giving the power back to people to be able to do something about it. So it's for me, it's the insight that the data provides to the individual that should encourage people to try and do something about that. And I wish I'd had something, especially when I was more in sales, but right, going out for drink 3 nights a week, it's kind of not really a great thing to do, because you're feeling knackered the next day. I mean, in some ways, it's you could say some of that's obvious, and that particular example is. But if you've had 2 days where you haven't hydrated properly, you're not drinking enough water, and then as a result, you're not sleeping, and as a result of not sleeping, you're not feeling yourself, and then the connections that go along this whole chain. That's the bit. Who wouldn't want to understand that? If to your point, if you're serious about your career and serious about your performance, why wouldn't you want to know this stuff?
And do you know what, Ed? And I think I'm going to say it right now. I'm definitely going to get the product for my team, 100%. I'm easily convinced anyway. But I think it's so important, because what would happen is, and we would be guilty of it here. I'm thinking, we want productivity in the business, and so productivity might be, let's have a team night out and go and get smashed. And then we've got casualties the next day or two for like 2 or 3 days. And we're thinking, why is productivity going down? It's almost like, what we wonder that, suddenly it's almost like, well, we've had a good night out. But I think people just, you mentioned it, Ed, and it's the awareness. People just aren't aware. And they're thinking, why are they sort of getting in this? And I'm really hoping that if there's one good thing about this pandemic, there's been tsunami of mental health problems, suicides, and distraught. The product you're doing and what you've done today, raising awareness of it. If in 2021 people are suddenly thinking, do you know what, we've had such a terrible year, why don't we actually invest in mental health, invest in doing healthy choices, invest in actually doing exercise, etc. And it's not perceived as namby-pamby because people aren't going out for a drink and getting smashed and whatever, and they're going for a bike ride or they're taking a dog, whatever it is. Productivity will just go up anyway in the industry, and everyone will be happy. If we do that, from a personal point of view, I think it'll be ecstatic. So I love what you're doing, Ed, and I think it's great. So
I was just going to say too.
Yeah, go ahead. You can wrap it up. Go ahead.
No, I'll go 2 little things. One is, by the way, let's not forget, there's nothing wrong with taking your team out for drinks for an evening and creating camaraderie. So, let's all still do that. Don't want to ban that. The other thing I was going to say, from an economics and a commercial point of view, to what you're just saying there, Mark, for organizations to invest in this, it's the simplest investment in the world, because if you save 2 or 3 people burning out, if you save 2 or 3 people leaving because they just end up thinking, I can't do this job anymore, I'm going to have to leave and do something else, and this is your business. If you think about, from an organization's point of view, the cost of recruiting, training, and replacing them. So the economics are just so bloody simple with this.
And they don't, but Colin, people don't realise that, do they? We're getting this burnout, and then we're suddenly thinking, guys going to be signed off for a month. It's almost like, add those hours up if we'd have just given them a break during the week.
Exactly.
So it is counterintuitive, and I think it's good. So Ed, look, maybe without, I don't want to do a sales pitch or anything, but if you could just say the last comment, on Teacup and the main benefits, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thanks, Colin. I think from my perspective, the business was created to help people thrive. It just so happens that we're talking more about surviving than thriving at the moment. But and coming back to the sort of macho point, the designers, the minds behind it, are Olympics elite athletes, etc. And we talk a lot about marginal gains, but what this is really looking at is just getting people to self-reflect and just be a little bit better each day, or at least understand, if they do go for that team, drinks, what the impact of that is. And, yes, you may feel rotten, but your ambition may be skyrocket because you've just spent some time with the team and the boys and the girls, and you're ready to smash it. So I think from our perspective is, the message out there is just pause, reflect, don't keep on running 100 miles an hour on this hamster wheel. In these unprecedented times, as Colin said, overused word, we just think, if I work hard and I work a little bit harder, I'd be okay. Actually pause, reflect, check in with yourself, check in with your mates, and don't be afraid. There's no such thing as, we all have problems. I think that's the reality. And that's the nice thing that Teacup probably shows, is everybody has good days, everybody has bad days. Some people more the one way or the other, but we are definitely all in this together. And my final note is, the reason it was set up is because in business, you get multiple shots at business. You only get one at life, so look after yourself.
Yeah. Guys, I've really, really enjoyed it. You've been fabulous guests. Thanks so much for your time. It's a wrap. Thanks for joining us and listening to another episode of our Channel Chat podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard and are listening on iTunes, please could you give us a review and subscribe in order to get the newest episodes as soon as they're released. Otherwise, as always, we release an episode every Thursday at midday, so hopefully you can join us then.